Hey everyone, today I'm going to be comparing the Santa Clarita Diet and Evil Dead 2, focusing specifically on how each portrays zombies. Now both of these media fall into a genre called Splatterstick, which basically mixes over-the-top gore with comedy, and even though they're very different in tone and style, they both use violence and horror in an exaggerated and almost ridiculous way to make the audience laugh as much as they react in shock and terror. Okay, in this presentation, I'll be comparing the key characteristics of the zombie in each story, what earlier monster types they resemble, and how each text is similar or different from other zombie narratives we've studied. But instead of just talking about the plot, I'll be focusing on specific scenes, characters, and filmmaking choices, like setting, camera work, and tone to show how each story fits into the zombie genre while also doing something unique. Before getting into the comparison, it's important to understand what Splatterstick actually is. Splatterstick is a blend of slapstick comedy and extreme gore. So you'll see things like exaggerated violence, lots of blood, and physical over-the-top humor happening at the same time. A good way to look at it would be like the Three Stooges meets Mortal Kombat, for my gamers out there. Instead of being purely scary, most scenes are meant to be ridiculous and entertaining. Both the Santa Clarita Diet and Evil Dead 2 use this style, but they apply it in very different ways, which we'll get into. In Santa Clarita Diet, the main character Sheila becomes undead, but she's very different from traditional zombies. She keeps her personality, her emotions, and her relationships. She's still a suburban mom trying to live a normal life, except now she has to eat human flesh to survive. A specific example of this is when Sheila and her husband Joel work together to kill people they justify as bad. The violence is graphic, but it's played for humor because it's happening in such a normal suburban setting. One thing that stands out with this series is at first glance, nothing about the show says zombie. It almost comes across as a sitcom. The zombie aspect is a complete surprise in some respects. This version of the zombie is controlled, self-aware, and even relatable, which makes it very different from classic zombie portrayals. In contrast, Evil Dead 2 features deadites, which are more like possessed bodies than traditional zombies. Once somebody is possessed, they completely lose their human identity. They become chaotic, violent, and often sadistic. A great example of this is the scene where Ash's own hand becomes possessed and attacks him. The iconic Ash versus hand scene begins shortly after the hand becomes possessed, featuring a lot of slapstick violence where Ash fights his own limbs, culminating in him pinning the hand down with books and cutting it off with a chainsaw. The hand's independence, exaggerated destruction, and Ash's reactions turn this moment into both horror and comedy. These creatures are unpredictable and grotesque, emphasizing loss of control rather than maintaining identity. When comparing the two with respect to zombie portrayal, both clearly use body horror and gore, which connects them to the splatterstick genre. However, Sheila represents a controlled form of undeath, while the Deadites represent complete and utter chaos and possession. This difference changes how the audience reacts. In Santa Clarita Diet, Sheila looks just like one of us, so the audience is able to sympathize with her. In Evil Dead 2, the horror comes from not knowing what will happen next. So even though both are funny and violent, they create very different emotional experiences. To get more specific, let's compare two scenes. In Santa Clarita Diet, Sheila's killings often happen in everyday suburban environments like homes or neighborhoods, which often makes the violence feel absurd because it clashes with everyday normal life. In the picture, we see Sheila sitting on the floor, surrounded by dead body parts. We also see a mop bucket and what looks to be a Rolex watch on one of the hands sitting on the stool. Both items seem to be out of place considering the circumstances, but that's what makes it funny. In Evil Dead 2, the scene where Ash fights his own possessed hand uses exaggerated physical comedy almost like a cartoon, but with extreme gore. It's like watching Bugs Bunny, but Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd actually accomplished their goal by shooting that rascally rabbit. Both scenes rely on over-the-top violence, but the humor comes from different places. one from normalcy being disrupted and the other from chaos spiraling out of control. Setting plays a big role in shaping each story. Santa Clarita Diet takes place in a bright, clean suburban environment, which contrasts heavily with the violent actions happening within it. As I stated before, at first glance, there's nothing about Santa Clarita Diet that says zombie. If anything, it says sitcom. And by sitcom, I'm talking Leave It to Beaver or The Cosby Show. Evil Dead 2, on the other hand, is set in an isolated cabin in the woods, which is a classic horror setting that creates tension and a sense of isolation and being trapped. The difference shows how each setting can influence tone. One feels safe but becomes disturbing, while the other is already threatening from the very start. The main characters also highlight the differences between the Santa Clarita Diet and Evil Dead 2. Sheila is sympathetic and relatable. Even after becoming undead, she's still focused on her family and relationships. Her family, especially her husband Joel, is actively trying to help her exist in her new reality. On the other hand, Ash in Evil Dead 2 is more of a comedic horror hero. He suffers constantly, reacting to increasingly ridiculous situations. This creates two different emotional connections. We care about Sheila's situation while we watch Ash struggle in a more exaggerated, almost comedic way. It's like watching Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. You watch the show because you want to see Wile E. suffer and laugh at his pain. In terms of themes, Santa Clarita Diet focuses on family, acceptance, and adapting to change. Even though Sheila is undead, her family works together to support her. Basically, they go out and look for people who are bad, who basically deserve to die. That way, when Sheila eats them, it's almost like she's doing the world a favor. Evil Dead 2, on the other hand, focuses more on survival and madness. Ash is isolated and pushed to his limits as he fights against the Deadites. Both stories deal with transformation, but they frame it differently. One as something to manage and the other as something to fear. The filmmaking style also reflects these differences. Santa Clarita Diet uses a cleaner, more stable camera style, which reinforces its suburban setting and comedic tone, similar to a sitcom, as I stated before. On the other hand, Evil Dead 2 uses fast cuts, dramatic angles, and chaotic camera movement to create a sense of confusion and intensity. A good example of that would be the deer head scene. These stylistic choices enhance how each story balances horror and comedy. In conclusion, both Santa Clarita Diet and Evil Dead 2 are strong examples of the splatterstick genre because they combine gore and humor in exaggerated ways. However, they approach the zombie very differently. Sheila represents a controlled, humanized version of the undead, while the Deadites in Evil Dead 2 represent chaos and loss of control. By comparing the specific scenes, settings, and characters, we can see how each fits into and challenges traditional zombie narratives.